It is absolutely no surprise to you all that I love thrifting. You know this, right? And for years, I've actually collected so many of my sewing supplies, sewing tools, sewing equipment, all from the thrift store secondhand. And that's where half of my stash comes from. You've seen the videos, right? But I know that, like all thrifting, it can be really confusing. I mean, you go into Joann's or Spotlight, like we have in Australia, and it's called the safe zone, right? Like, you know what you're going to get, you know what to expect. But in a thrift store, it's all hard. What do you even look for? I'm going to show you the different sewing supplies and the sewing equipment that I look for in the thrift store, how I know whether it's quality, the things I look for at the thrift store. There's a lot. Welcome back, ladies and gents. Thank you so much for joining in for this video today. I think this is going to be a fun one because it's basically kind of like a show and tell, but just talking about the show and the tell. So if you are new here, my name's Evelyn Wood, and on this channel we talk everything sort of sewing, sustainable sewing, how to be a better sewer and implement better sewing skills. This one is about sustainability. So I know I like to look for secondhand, thrifted, a garage sale, maybe even just like passed on sewing kits. So this question actually came up after I came back from a bit of a thrifting haul and I sort of posted about it on Instagram, and I was amazed at how many people actually didn't realize that you could even get sewing equipment at the thrift store. My mind was blown. So I actually asked on Instagram the questions, like, what questions do you have about finding thrifted sewing equipment? And there were so many questions, which is amazing. So I actually thought that it warrants a number of videos on this topic. This one's going to be based around the types of things that I sort of look for and find at the thrift store. So it gives you an idea of what is out there and what to look for in those things, so you know whether you're getting quality or not quality, what's good, what's bad, what's too old, what's not too old, all that sort of thing. So let's just dive in. One of the first things that I always find are sheets, old bed linen, because I use these for my toiles. You might call it a mock-up, a muslin. Old bed sheets make the best toiles, used for, basically it's your test garment. So obviously there's different rules for toile fabric, you want it like for like, but that's not this video. With sheets though, do keep in mind the quality matters, and it's actually a little different than you think. The higher the thread count means the more tightly woven it is, and the harder it is to actually sew. Your needle will sort of struggle to go through a little bit, and it won't ease in as much, and it might not handle as well as your dress fabric usually handles. So I find actually the poorer quality or the more loosely woven bed sheets work best. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for bed sheets too. Of course, fabric. I always find different types of little rolls, remnants, big lengths, sometimes too, of fabric. So there is so much great quality fabric to be found there for a really cheap price. And of course, it's far more sustainable buying both the bed sheets and fabric than it is to buy brand new fabric. So I definitely recommend keeping your eye out for that. As to how to tell good quality, bad quality, to how to tell the fibers difference, that is perhaps an entirely different video because there's so much to say on that. Do let me know in the comments below on these particular things if you want to hear more about them. But let's just keep moving on with the types of things that you can find. You would be absolutely so amazed at how many dress sewing patterns are actually at the thrift store to find. These are in abundance from varying ages, from vintage patterns to the vintage Vogues to modern dress patterns, obviously heaps. There are so many in so many different sizes. I always collect the vintage ones, obviously, vintage Vogues or anything special, I still get those. When you learn a bit more about pattern making, you can obviously then adjust any size that you need, and you can change the styles and everything. So as you even get better at that, there's even more you can do with those patterns too. But do keep an eye out for patterns because there are so many great old ones too. The vintage ones are the best. I actually find the 60s, 70s patterns are quite actually really good because they're a cross between modern and vintage, I think. They have a nice fit and everything's really tailored really nicely, but they have sort of modern instructions and modern markings, so it's really clear and easy to see. So I think it's a nice, I actually like that decade for a nice mix and ease of use with patterns. I get pretty much most of my sewing books from either secondhand book fairs or the thrift store. So maybe that is an entirely different video again about my favorite sewing books. I do get asked a bit, so do let me know if that's of interest. But pretty much all of my sewing books come from the thrift store. I find my vintage ones mostly at book fairs. But there are so many great sewing books. Almost all of them are wonderful resources because we can never stop learning enough. I know I never stop learning, so keep an eye out for all the sewing books. There's so much a wealth of knowledge there for you, waiting for you. Now, it is definitely no secret that I like lace, particularly a vintage lace, and I get so many of these from the thrift store. I find it all the time. Though there is a really, really big difference between the modern lace that you will find mostly when you walk into, say, your Joann's or your Spotlight stores. They're all, let's say, very lackluster, all the modern laces. So I actually find quite a lot of vintage lace at the thrift store, at garage sales, secondhand stores, so much. And again, maybe that's an entirely different video if you're interested to look at the different types, how to tell what to look for. So I generally look for the older ones, handmade lace, because a lot of people don't like lace a lot, so no one else buys it except me. So it's always there for me, which is really, really great. I take thin lace, wide lace, cotton lace, nylon lace, rayon lace, the works. I love it. Different lengths for different uses. Now I'm putting threads in here, but I don't usually get my threads from the thrift store, but I know I'm going to get questions about it, and I did before. Maybe a different video, but there are always, you'll find different color threads there for sure, and it's a great way to save some money though. There is a big sort of asterisk next to the thread, is that yes, it can go bad. So old thread, very old vintage thread, you don't want to buy. Beautiful old cotton little bobbins, you know, when they're on wooden bobbins and the reels of thread look amazing, but you do not want to actually use that in your garments. How to tell, you know, is quite difficult because sometimes you'll do this and it won't break, but you put it in your machine and it will just keep breaking. More so cotton obviously deteriorates over time, being a natural fiber, and that's what the vintage reels, you know, threads are made from the most. If you find one that looks exactly like it does now in the store and it looks perfectly modern and brand new, then it's probably okay to use. They're mostly polyester or polyester mixes, and they last, obviously polyester is going to last an eternity almost, but it does mean that the thread will be better to use. So if you find the modern reels, finding threads at the thrift store, you quite often find them in those bags that are just like mixed bags of sewing stuff, and it's just got bits of everything. But just bear in mind that there is such a thing as old bad thread, and it will just keep breaking, so you do not want that in your life. Going along with threads almost is embroidery floss. So I find bags like this all the time with mostly cotton embroidery floss, but sometimes I find silk ones as well, and pretty much I've stopped buying them because they're in such abundance and I find them so often that I pretty much got most of the colors. Unless I'm going to look for something specific, I'm not going to bring any more home because there's so much of it. So I use this not only for embroidery but for mending as well. It gives a nicer finish, I think, sometimes for different mending jobs, and it's nice to have these thicker you know, threads around and more colors for different types of jobs like that. So I always take home these, and definitely the silk ones when you come across them. Oh gosh, yeah. Buttons. I mean, everybody's seen those button jars, and they're just like a mix of every button that a person has cut off any garment for the last probably 25 years. Looks like it's sitting in that jar, right? We all have seen those. So I mostly look for buttons that are in sets because, you know, the ones in jars are generally kind of random buttons most of the time. So I always look for ones that are sets that match either the color schemes that I like. Obviously, if I find vintage glass ones, love even more, and shell and all of that sort of thing. I definitely take preference over those, and most of the modern plastic ones I try and leave, but I do like these sort of, you know, these are just plastic ones, but far more interesting as well. Different shapes for different jobs. And again, if you're interested to see what kinds of buttons I sort of pick up, let me know, but there are abundance of buttons, and it's the kind of thing that you need to, when you see them and like them, you need to buy them when you see them, because if you can't just go out looking for the particular button or the button size at the thrift store. That is not how it works. You'll never find what you're looking for. So you do just need to kind of collect these and add them to your stash so that they're on hand and you'll use them, you know, when you need them, but have them in your stash. Now, I have actually in the past made some videos on sewing tools specifically. I have a video on sewing tools for beginners and some sewing tools and equipment that you want to sort of upgrade to. So if you're looking for that kind of information as well, then I'll link those down below so you can go watch those after this video. Hand sewing needles are everywhere in abundance. I find heaps of vintage ones and modern ones, and they don't age or anything. They are fine, absolutely fine. Definitely buy all of these from the thrift store. No need to buy those new at all. And the same goes for snaps and hooks and eye closures. I cannot tell you, I've stopped buying all of these from the thrift store, and like, you know, like the bags of like hand-me-down sewing stashes. I have stopped buying them because I have so many, particularly I find vintage ones all of the time in different collections. So definitely don't bother buying these new. You will find these at the thrift store. Not every thrift store, of course, but you know, you'll find those for sure. I'm always on the hunt for tape measures. Now I have at least like, you know, 25,000 tape measures, but I like the ones, the vintage ones, fiberglass, that actually are printed on both sides. Like one starts from each end on either side, and I like them to have both centimeters and inches on both sides. So I find it really hard to find those new, but I do find they are vintage ones. That was just the standard. So I keep my eye out for those types of tape measures because that's what I prefer to sew with. They are a little bit rarer, but that's what I try and find. So don't take them on them. Leave them at the store for me, please. That would be really nice. So I find awls all of the time. You know, you only need one. Once you've got one, that's it. What is this for? This is mostly used for pattern making, to punch holes in your patterns, to make notches, etc. You can also use it to punch eyelets, things like that sometimes in sewing. But this is an awl or a stiletto. So these are there all the time. I think mostly because people don't know what to do with them. So you do see bunches of elastic all the time. Now I have big rolls that I collected from when I was doing a fashion label, so I have it on hand already, more than I need. But you do see little packets from time to time, and you should definitely pick those up if you do find them. Though one of the questions is, does elastic go bad? Yes, it certainly does. The easy way to tell is to just stretch it. If it feels crumbly, if it's not going back into shape, even the slightest, it feels just not quite as stretchy as it should, leave it behind. It will be no good. But if it looks pretty new and you're stretching it and there's like, it just feels good as good, then take it and definitely use it. Saves you buying new. So who now is going to run off to the thrift store and go and, you know, get all the little goodies that I find there? With all of these, with any thrifting, I think it is about not, you know, going to the store to find the exact thing that you need. You know, if you're trying to look for a 2.1 millimeter buttons and look for a linen fabric 2.5 meters in length, that's not how thrifting works. That's when you go to the retail store, you pay full retail price and you buy, you know, brand new things. Thrifting is about finding the things that you like along the way. So knowing your style, knowing your sewing, and yes, it does mean collecting a bit in your stash, but for me, these are already found second-hand items. So I think it's more useful for us to be using these things that already exist than to be buying new things. So I'm okay with adding to my stash, and I like to have them around just to look at them, play with them. It inspires me for my projects that I want to make. So I like having them on hand. And I think that's the way that you need to look at thrifting, is sort of collecting the things that you like to use it when you're ready. Let me know below what you like to thrift the most from the thrift store. Tell me, because I always like to hear. And if you do actually do a little sewing tool, sewing equipment haul, please tag me. Instagram is Evelyn _, 2 of them. Please tag me so I can see if you've been inspired to go to the thrift store and actually use, you know, some more secondhand and more sustainable sewing equipment and tools. I hope you've got a bit more confidence perhaps now going to a thrift store or secondhand store, and just opens your eyes a little to what is available secondhand. And trust me, the quality and the unique items that you can find there far, far better than anything you can buy brand new in the store. So I hope you enjoyed. Please like this video if you liked it, and share it amongst your friends. If you have some sewing friends that would like to go to the thrift store and find some items too, please, I really do appreciate those shares. It helps get this content out into the world, and new people who are looking for this sort of thing, it helps them find it too. So until next time, happy sewing and happy thrift store hunting. Bye.